Today we're going to talk about cuffs. Generally speaking, there are two types of cuffs, a barrel cuff and a French cuff. I have three types of barrel cuffs in front of me. The one in the center is the basic, where we have a 90-degree angle, so it's basically a rectangle. There is also the rounded cuff that has a rounded instead of a 90-degree angle. And then the third type of barrel cuff that is prevalent in shirts is a clipped edge. So those are the three types of barrel cuffs that generally are used. The third, or the second type of cuff altogether, is the French cuff. So here we have, which looks like a barrel cuff, but it folds on itself, which then creates a French cuff. There are no buttons. There are 4 buttonholes, but this is the second type, the French cuff. It folds over, and then a link, cuff link or other type of link would be used. So to do a barrel cuff, it's very easy. What you want to do is get a piece of paper, fold it in half, you will need a ruler and a pencil or some marking tool. You can crease that. This is an easy method. You can also make a cuff where there's 2 pieces that get sewn together, an upper and an under cuff pattern. So what you want to do is you want to measure out the length of the cuff that you need, and I'm going to add an extension to it. So I've marked that out. The cuff itself is going to be 2 inches. So measure 2 inches up, the ruler's 2 inches, so I will just continue that through. And then I want to add a 1-inch extension. And then you want to square a line up from your fold line to that point. You then would add seam allowance to it. So generally, because the cuff gets attached and is turned in on itself, 1/4 of an inch is sufficient. You could add a 1/2 inch up here if you wanted to for ease of sewing. So 1/4 of an inch. And basically your cuff is done. We will square a line straight up. So this is going to be the extension. And in the center you would locate where the button would go. So 1 inch up because this is 2 inches. So a little bit lower. And then the buttonhole itself would go on the opposite side, about 3/4 of an inch away in the center. So if you want to just mark that, and the buttonhole would start 1/8 of an inch past your center point, and it would be dependent, the buttonhole itself would be dependent on the size of the button that you're using. So I'll just say it's a 1/2 inch in this case. And this is where the button would sit. That'll get cut out. And you're going to continue your lines on the opposite side too. You don't want to just mark them halfway through. So the next thing that's important is going to be the grain line, and the grain line can, in this case, go straight through the center. Remember to mark it with arrows. Or you can actually have your grain line perpendicular to that. So fill in the rest. So we have 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on this side. I've placed a 1/2 inch on that side. And 1/4 of an inch on this opposite side. I'm going to label this shirt cuff. And in this case, because we have the full cuff itself, this is going to be cut 2, one for the left and one for the right. Self for fashion fabric, and cut, well, I was going to say you could cut this with interfacing, but that would be too much, so you would make a pattern that would be half that size. But that's how you do a basic shirt barrel cuff. The barrel cuff is most common. It's a straight open band. The barrel laps and buttons at the wrist. So it would fold back when it's attached, and it would attach at the wrist like this. You can have a convertible barrel cuff which attaches like that also, which then the extension is a little bit different. But that is a basic cuff. This is the second type is the French cuff. It's the most formal style. The construction is the same as the barrel, but twice as wide. It is held together with a cuff link. And for that one, what you're going to want to do is get another piece of paper, fold it in half. This time, as I said, it's going to be twice the height. So basically, we're almost at the edge there. So you want to measure the distance of the cuff that you need. So I'm going to do 8.5 again for my sleeve. And you're going to need to add an inch extension to both sides. Square a line straight up, that's 4 inches. So in reality, this piece of paper is too small. So we'll go through the steps without the seam allowance. You want to add an inch extension here and an inch extension on the opposite side also. I can add 3/4 of an inch extension there. We'll say it's the edge of the paper. So I'm going to compensate because of my small piece of paper and add more than an inch on this side, and I'll shift the lines over. So this is no longer the edge. And then from here I'll just mark in. So here's my 1 inch extension. This is no longer. So if you make a mistake, just cross it out. You don't have to sit there and erase the entire thing. This gets cut out, and then button placement. Don't forget to add your seam allowance. Once again, because this is going to be turned in on itself, your seam allowance would be 1/4 of an inch. So this then becomes the pattern minus the seam allowance. Let me clean this up a little. This becomes the pattern. Well, it becomes the draft. Let's just put it that way. Because I did not add seam allowance, so it is not a pattern. But what you would want to do is trace this off on a larger piece of paper, and then basically add your grain line. And then this is the French cuff. You could also have this where there's a seam allowance here and there's a separate piece. So cut 2. And that's a French cuff.